Single father janitor says something to mute girl and she whispers, unaware her powerful cold mother was watching and crying. Before anything else, let's see how connected we really are. What's one thing you can see from your window right now? The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Manhattan penthouse as Marcus Thompson pushed his cleaning cart down the pristine hallway. At 32, his weathered hands told the story of a man who'd fought for every dollar, every opportunity. The designer suits hanging in closets worth more than his annual salary reminded him daily of the chasm between his world and theirs. But none of that mattered when he saw her. Little Emma sat cross-legged in the corner of the vast living room, her blonde curls catching the light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. 6 years old and beautiful as an angel, she hadn't spoken a single word since the day she was born. The army of specialists, therapists, and doctors had all delivered the same verdict: physically capable, mentally sound, but locked in a silence that no one could break. Marcus had been cleaning these offices for 3 years, watching Emma grow from a toddler into this quiet little girl who seemed to understand everything but shared nothing. Today, she was arranging her wooden blocks with the same methodical precision she always displayed, creating perfect towers that defied her age. "Good morning, sunshine," Marcus said softly, the way he always did. The other staff had long since stopped trying to interact with the strange little girl, but something about Emma's bright blue eyes told him she was listening, always listening. He knelt down, pretending to dust the coffee table nearby. "You know, Emma, I had a daughter once. She would have been about your age now." His voice carried the weight of old pain, carefully controlled. "She used to build towers just like yours." Emma's small hands paused for just a moment, and Marcus felt his heart skip. In 3 years, he'd never seen her react to anything anyone said. "Her name was Lily," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I used to tell her that words weren't the only way to show love. Sometimes the most important things we have to say come from somewhere deeper than our voices." Emma turned her head slightly, those impossibly blue eyes meeting his for the first time ever. Marcus felt something electric pass between them, a connection that transcended the silence that had defined her existence. "You know what I think, Emma?" Marcus said, his voice warm with something that might have been hope. "I think you're just waiting for the right moment to share what's in that beautiful heart of yours." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Then so quietly that Marcus almost thought he'd imagined it, Emma's lips moved. "I love you." The words were barely a whisper, fragile as butterfly wings, but they shattered the silence that had surrounded Emma for 6 long years. Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes as he stared at this little girl who had just spoken her first words. Not to her mother, not to her doctors, but to him. What neither of them knew was that Victoria Ashford stood frozen in the doorway of her office, her phone dropping from nerveless fingers to crash against the marble floor. Victoria Ashford had built an empire worth $12 billion by the age of 27, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She pressed herself against the doorframe, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had finally unlocked her daughter's voice. Emma's first words. After 6 years of silence, specialists from around the world and more sleepless nights than she could count, her daughter had whispered, "I love you," to the janitor. Victoria's manicured hand flew to her mouth as tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years began to fall. She'd given Emma everything, the best schools, the finest toys, every opportunity money could buy. But she'd been so consumed with running Ashford Industries, with board meetings and hostile takeovers, that she'd missed the most important moments of her daughter's life. Marcus was still kneeling beside Emma, his expression a mixture of wonder and something that looked suspiciously like joy. "Did you just—" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Emma nodded solemnly, her small hand reaching out to touch his weathered cheek. "I love you," she repeated, stronger this time, each word clear and deliberate. Victoria felt her legs give way, and she sank against the wall, watching as her daughter, her silent, mysterious daughter, smiled for the first time in months. The smile wasn't directed at her mother's wealth, her influence, or any of the expensive gifts that filled Emma's room. It was for a man who made minimum-wage cleaning offices, who had somehow reached through 6 years of silence with nothing but kindness. "Why me, sweetheart?" Marcus asked gently, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why now?" Emma's answer came in that same whisper-soft voice, but every word cut through Victoria like a blade. "Because you see me. Mama sees work. You see Emma." The observation was devastating in its simplicity and truth. Victoria thought of all the times she'd been on conference calls during Emma's therapy sessions, All the bedtime stories that had been delegated to nannies, all the moments she'd chosen board reports over building blocks. Marcus seemed to sense they weren't alone. He glanced toward the doorway, his eyes widening as he spotted Victoria. For a moment, they stared at each other across the elegant room, the billionaire CEO in her designer suit, and the janitor who had just witnessed a miracle. "Mrs. Ashford," Marcus said quietly, rising to his feet. "I think you should know." But Victoria was already moving, crossing the room with quick, desperate steps. She knelt beside her daughter, her heart hammering as she reached out with trembling hands. "Emma, baby, can you say something to Mama?" Emma looked at her mother's tear-stained face, those blue eyes so much like Victoria's own, and for a moment, hope flickered in Victoria's chest. Then Emma turned back to Marcus, her small hand finding his. The silence stretched between mother and daughter, more profound now because Victoria knew Emma could break it. She simply chose not to. 24 hours later, Victoria stood in her corner office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline without seeing it. The city that had once represented her conquest now felt like a prison of her own making. Her assistant's voice droned through the intercom about quarterly projections, but all Victoria could hear were Emma's words echoing in her mind. "You see work. You see Emma." The truth was a knife twisting in her chest. She'd fought so hard to build something meaningful, to create a legacy worthy of her daughter, that she'd forgotten the daughter herself. Emma's silence hadn't been a medical mystery, it had been a choice. A choice to remain voiceless in a world where her mother's voice dominated everything. "Cancel my meetings," Victoria said suddenly, cutting off her assistant mid-sentence. "Ma'am, you have the Henderson acquisition at 2, and the board meeting at 4. Cancel them all." Victoria was already reaching for her purse, her mind made up. "And get me Marcus Thompson's personnel file. I want to know everything." 30 minutes later, Victoria sat in her Mercedes outside a weathered apartment building in Queens, Marcus Thompson's file open on her lap. 32 years old, divorced 3 years ago. No children listed in his emergency contacts despite mentioning a daughter to Emma. The pieces of a broken life scattered across official documents and employment records. She found him on the 4th floor, his door marked with peeling numbers that spoke of dreams deferred and struggles endured. When he answered her knock, his expression shifted from surprise to something approaching wariness. "Mrs. Ashford, I wasn't expecting. May I come in?" Victoria's voice was softer than she'd ever used in a boardroom, uncertain in a way that felt foreign. "I need to understand what happened today." Marcus stepped aside, and Victoria entered a world she'd never seen. Not poverty exactly, but the careful economy of someone who counted every dollar. The apartment was spotlessly clean, decorated with what looked like garage sale finds arranged with obvious care. "She spoke to you," Victoria said without preamble. "After 6 years of silence, she spoke to you. I need to know why." Marcus gestured to a worn but comfortable couch. "Can I ask you something first?" "Mrs. Ashford?" Victoria nodded, settling into the unfamiliar space. "When's the last time you sat on the floor with Emma? Not watching her play while you worked, but actually playing with her." The question hit like a physical blow. Victoria opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. She couldn't remember. Board meetings, charity galas, acquisition dinners. She could recite her schedule from memory. But when had she last simply been Emma's mother? "I see," Marcus said quietly, reading her expression. "You want to know why she spoke to me? Because I listen when she doesn't speak. I see the way she arranges her blocks, the patterns she makes, the way she watches people. Your daughter isn't broken, Mrs. Ashford. She's just been waiting for someone to notice she was there. But she said she loves you," Victoria whispered, the words tearing at her throat. Her first words were about loving a stranger instead of her own mother. Marcus leaned forward, his expression gentle but firm. "Mrs. Ashford, I lost my daughter 2 years ago. Car accident, she was 4. His voice caught, but he continued. "Every day I come to work and see Emma, I see what I lost. So yes, I pay attention. I talk to her like she matters, like her silence is just another way of being whole." Victoria felt the room spin around her. All this time she'd thought Emma's silence was something to be fixed, cured, overcome. But Marcus saw it as something to be honored, understood, accepted. "How do I get her back?" Victoria asked, her voice breaking on the words she'd never imagined she'd say to a janitor in Queens. "How do I get my daughter back?" Marcus's answer wasn't what Victoria expected. Instead of advice, he asked a question that shattered every assumption she'd built her life around. "Do you even know what Emma loves, Mrs. Ashford? Not what you think she should love?" Or what other 6-year-olds love. What makes Emma Emma? Victoria sat in stunned silence, scrolling through memories that suddenly felt hollow. Designer clothes Emma never seemed to wear. Expensive toys she rarely touched. Educational programs she endured rather than enjoyed. How had she become a stranger to her own daughter? I don't know, she admitted, the words barely audible. I don't know my own child. Marcus rose and moved to a bookshelf, pulling out a photo album Victoria hadn't noticed. May I show you something? He opened to a page filled with pictures of a little girl with dark hair and bright eyes, captured in moments of pure joy, finger painting, building sandcastles, chasing bubbles in a park. This was my Lily, Marcus said softly. I took these pictures in the 6 months before she died. You know what I learned? Children don't need perfect. They need present. Victoria studied the photos, seeing something in them that was absent from the professional portraits of Emma that lined her penthouse walls. These pictures captured a father who was fully engaged with his daughter, someone who saw wonder in finger paint and magic in soap bubbles. Emma watches you, Marcus continued. Every time you walk through that office, she tracks your movement. She's not angry at you, Mrs. Ashford. She's waiting for you to see her the way I saw Lily, the way I see Emma now. But she won't speak to me, Victoria protested. Even after today, she just looks at me and chooses silence. Because you're still trying to fix her instead of knowing her, Marcus said with a gentleness that somehow made the truth bearable. Emma's silence isn't a problem to be solved. It's a language you never learned to speak. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of truth so fundamental it changed everything. Teach me, she whispered. Please. I'll pay you anything, give you anything. Just teach me how to talk to my daughter. Marcus closed the photo album and looked at her with something approaching compassion. Mrs. Ashford, this isn't something money can buy. But if you're serious about wanting to know Emma, really know her, then we need to start with you understanding why she chose to speak to me. Tell me. Because I told her about Lily. I shared something real, something that hurt, something that mattered. Emma has been surrounded by people who want to study her, fix her, or impress you through her. I just wanted to connect with her. Victoria felt the walls she'd built around her heart begin to crack. What do I share with a 6-year-old that isn't about business or money or success? You start with truth, Marcus said simply. You tell her about the day she was born, about how scared you were when she didn't cry right away, about how you used to hold her all night when she was a baby, afraid to put her down because she seemed too precious to be real. Tears Victoria had held back for years began to fall in earnest. How do you know that? Because that's what love looks like before it gets complicated by everything else. Marcus handed her a tissue from a box that had seen plenty of use. The question is, are you ready to be that vulnerable with your daughter? Victoria wiped her eyes, seeing her reflection in the window of Marcus's modest apartment. For the first time in years, she looked like a woman instead of a corporation. Yes, she said, meaning it more than any business deal she'd ever agreed to. I'm ready. The next morning, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She canceled all her meetings and went to Emma's school. Not for a parent-teacher conference or a charity fundraiser, but simply to pick up her daughter and spend the day together. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, looked surprised when Victoria appeared in the classroom doorway at noon. Mrs. Ashford, is everything all right? Emma's not scheduled for early dismissal. I'd like to take my daughter out for the afternoon, Victoria said, her voice carrying none of its usual corporate authority. If that's possible. Emma looked up from her art project, those blue eyes wide with confusion. In 6 years, Victoria had never been the parent who showed up unexpectedly, who disrupted schedules for the sake of spontaneity. Of course, Mrs. Rodriguez said, though her expression suggested this was highly unusual. Emma, your mother is here to take you on an adventure. Emma gathered her things slowly, as if waiting for Victoria to remember an urgent phone call or an important meeting that would change their plans. But Victoria just stood there, patient in a way that felt foreign to both of them. They drove in silence through Manhattan, past the towering buildings that housed Victoria's empire, until they reached Central Park. Victoria parked the car and turned to face her daughter. Emma, she began, her voice uncertain in a way it never was in boardrooms. I want to tell you about the day you were born. Emma's hands stilled on her backpack zipper, those perceptive eyes fixed on her mother's face. I was terrified, Victoria continued, the words coming easier than she'd expected. Not of the business deals I might miss or the meetings I'd have to reschedule. I was terrified that I wouldn't be good enough for you, that I wouldn't know how to be your mama. Emma's expression shifted, something that might have been surprise flickering across her features. When you were born, you didn't cry right away. For 30 seconds, that felt like 30 years. You just looked at me with these incredible blue eyes, and I knew my whole world had changed. I held you all night that first night, afraid to put you down because you seemed too perfect to be real. Victoria reached out slowly, giving Emma time to pull away if she wanted to. Instead, Emma leaned into her mother's touch, the first time she'd initiated physical contact in months. I got lost somewhere along the way, Victoria whispered, her voice thick with tears. I started trying to build a world worthy of you instead of just being present in the world we already had. And I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I made you feel invisible. Emma's lips parted, and for a moment Victoria held her breath. But instead of words, Emma did something she hadn't done since she was a toddler. She climbed into her mother's lap and wrapped her small arms around Victoria's neck. They sat together in the car, mother and daughter, while the city bustled around them. Victoria felt Emma's heartbeat against her chest and realized this was the first time in years she'd felt completely present in any moment. "Want to go feed the ducks?" Victoria asked eventually. Emma pulled back to look at her mother's face, searching for something. Then, slowly, she nodded. They spent the afternoon by the pond, and Victoria discovered things about her daughter she'd never known. Emma had names for all the ducks. She could skip stones with surprising accuracy for a 6-year-old. She preferred strawberry ice cream to chocolate, sunflowers to roses, and watching clouds to watching cartoons. As the sun began to set, Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve and pointed to a bench overlooking the water. "Want to sit together?" Victoria asked. Emma nodded and settled beside her mother, her small hand finding Victoria's. They watched the ducks glide across the water in comfortable silence, and Victoria realized that for the first time in years she wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or acquisition targets. Then Emma spoke, her voice still whisper-soft but clear as crystal. "Mama sad?" Victoria looked down at her daughter, seeing not the silent child who frustrated doctors and worried teachers, but the perceptive little girl who had been watching, understanding, waiting for her mother to be real. "I was sad," Victoria admitted, "but not anymore. Not when I'm with you." Emma squeezed her mother's hand and leaned against her side. "Emma loves Mama too." 6 weeks later, Victoria's office looked dramatically different. The sterile perfection had been replaced by something warmer, more human. Crayon drawings hung beside quarterly reports. A small reading corner had been carved out near the windows, and Emma's wooden blocks sat in a place of honor on the mahogany desk. Marcus knocked on the open door, pushing his cleaning cart with the same quiet dignity he'd always carried. But now, instead of being invisible help, he was a welcome part of their daily routine. "Good afternoon, ladies," he said, smiling as Emma looked up from the book Victoria was reading to her. "Marcus." Emma's voice, though still soft, carried genuine joy. In 6 weeks, her vocabulary had exploded. She spoke in full sentences now, asked endless questions, and filled the silence that had defined her for so long with laughter and wonder. "How was school today, sunshine?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair Victoria had placed specifically for these conversations. "We learned about butterflies," Emma said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Did you know they remember being caterpillars?" "Is that so?" Marcus glanced at Victoria, who was watching this exchange with something approaching awe. Even after weeks of progress, she was still amazed by her daughter's transformation. "Emma, why don't you tell Marcus about our weekend plans?" Victoria suggested. Emma practically bounced in her chair. "We're going to visit Marcus's mama in the hospital, and then we're having a picnic in the park, and Mama said we can invite anyone we want." Marcus's expression shifted, surprise and something deeper flickering across his features. "Your mama told you about visiting my mother?" "She tells me everything now," Emma said matter-of-factly. "About work and about feelings and about how she used to be scared to be my mama." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Marcus's approving nod made her embarrassment fade. "That's what good mamas do," Marcus said gently. "They share their hearts with their daughters." "Marcus," Victoria said. "Yeah?" Her voice carrying the weight of a decision she'd been building toward for weeks. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about presence versus presence." Marcus tilted his head, waiting. "I want to offer you a position," Victoria continued. "Not charity, not pity, a real job. I need someone to help me remember what matters. Someone to help me stay present in Emma's life while still running the company." "What kind of position?" Marcus asked, carefully. "Family liaison," Victoria said, the title feeling right as she spoke it. "Someone who helps me balance being Emma's mother with being Victoria Ashford. Someone who reminds me when board meetings matter less than bedtime stories. Emma clapped her hands together. Marcus would work with us every day? If he wants to, Victoria said, her eyes meeting Marcus's. The salary would be substantial, enough to help with your mother's medical bills, enough to give you the kind of security you deserve. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Mrs. Ashford, I appreciate this more than you know, but I need to ask, are you offering me this job because you're grateful, or because you think Emma and I have formed some kind of attachment that requires management? The question was direct, challenging, and exactly what Victoria had come to expect from the man who had opened her eyes to her daughter's true nature. I'm offering you this job because you see people, Victoria said honestly. You saw Emma when no one else did. You saw me drowning in my own success when I couldn't see it myself. And frankly, I need someone in my life who will call me out when I start losing sight of what matters again. And what if Emma decides she doesn't want to talk anymore? Marcus asked. What if the pressure of this new dynamic changes things? Emma looked between the two adults, then slid off her chair and walked over to Marcus. She placed her small hands on his knees and looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. Marcus, she said in her soft, clear voice, you helped Mama find me. Now we help each other find everything else. Marcus looked down at this remarkable little girl, then over at her mother, who was watching with tears in her eyes and hope written across her face. Well, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, I guess I'd better accept the job then. Someone needs to make sure you two don't take over the world while I'm not looking. Emma giggled and threw her arms around Marcus's neck, and Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced since Emma was born. The absolute certainty that her daughter was exactly where she was supposed to be. But as the three of them laughed together in the golden afternoon light streaming through the office windows, none of them noticed the figure watching from the building across the street, or the telephoto lens capturing every moment of their joy. Someone else had been watching Emma's transformation, and they had plans of their own. The photographs arrived on Victoria's desk on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier in an unmarked envelope. Her hands trembled as she spread them across the mahogany surface. Dozens of pictures capturing intimate moments over the past 6 weeks. Emma laughing in the park, Marcus reading to her in the office, Victoria and Emma feeding ducks by the pond. Someone had been watching them, documenting their every move. The accompanying note was brief and chilling. Some families aren't meant to be happy. You have 48 hours to send the girl away, or everyone will learn the truth about Marcus Thompson. The choice is yours. Victoria's blood turned to ice. What truth? What could possibly justify this invasion of their newfound happiness? Her intercom buzzed. Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Thompson is here with Emma for story time. Send them away, Victoria said automatically, then caught herself. No, wait, send them in. Emma burst through the door first, her face glowing with excitement. Mama, we saw a butterfly garden on the way up. Can we plant one on the roof? But Emma's enthusiasm faded when she saw her mother's pale face. With the intuition that had always set her apart, Emma moved closer to Victoria's desk, her eyes drawn to the scattered photographs. Mama scared? Emma asked softly. Marcus followed Emma's gaze, and his expression darkened as he recognized the images. Mrs. Ashford, where did these come from? Victoria quickly gathered the photos, but not before Marcus caught a glimpse of the threatening note. His face went ashen, and something that looked like guilt flickered in his eyes. I need to speak with Marcus alone, Victoria said to Emma, forcing her voice to remain steady. Why don't you go to the reading corner and pick out a book? Emma hesitated, sensing the tension in the room, but eventually settled into her favorite spot by the window. You know what this is about, Victoria said once Emma was out of earshot. I can see it in your face. Marcus sank into the chair across from her desk, suddenly looking every one of his 32 years. Mrs. Ashford, there are things about my past, things I never told you because they didn't seem relevant anymore. Tell me now, Victoria demanded, her CEO voice returning despite her fear. Marcus glanced toward Emma, who was pretending to read but clearly listening to every word. Not here. Not in front of her. Then we go somewhere else. Right now. 20 minutes later, they sat in Victoria's car in the parking garage beneath her building. Emma safely upstairs with Marcus's temporary replacement. The concrete walls felt like a fortress, but Victoria knew they offered no real protection from whoever was hunting them. 3 years ago, I wasn't a janitor, Marcus began, his voice heavy with shame. I was Detective Marcus Thompson, NYPD. I had a good life, a beautiful wife, a daughter I adored. Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her. Detective? Narcotics Division. I was working a case involving a drug trafficking ring that went all the way to the top of some very powerful families. Families with connections to politicians, judges, business people. Marcus's hands clenched on his knees. I gathered evidence, built a case that would have brought down 20 major players. What happened? Someone leaked that I was getting close. They couldn't buy me, couldn't threaten me through normal channels, so they went after my family. Marcus's voice broke. The car accident that killed Lily and hospitalized my wife Sarah, it wasn't an accident. Victoria's heart stopped. Oh my God. I had a choice. Pursue the case and risk Sarah's life too, or disappear. Let Marcus Thompson, the detective, die and become someone invisible, someone safe. He looked up at Victoria with eyes full of anguish. I chose Sarah. I chose survival. I buried the evidence and became a ghost. But if you have evidence, had evidence, I destroyed it all to protect what was left of my family. Sarah recovered physically, but she couldn't handle what we'd lost. She divorced me, moved across the country, started over. And I became the janitor who nobody notices, nobody remembers. Victoria processed this revelation, pieces clicking into place. And now someone knows who you really were, which means they know I still represent a threat even without the evidence. Marcus met her eyes. Mrs. Ashford, being around me puts you and Emma in danger. Real danger. From somewhere in the shadows of the parking garage, a slow clap echoed off the concrete walls. Both Victoria and Marcus spun toward the sound, their hearts racing. A figure stepped into the pale fluorescent light. A woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with cold eyes and a smile that held no warmth. How touching, the woman said. A cop, a billionaire, and a mute child. What a lovely little family you've created. Victoria's hand moved instinctively toward her phone, but the woman held up a manicured finger. I wouldn't, she said conversationally. Security cameras in this garage have been experiencing technical difficulties for the past hour. No one knows we're here. Who are you? Victoria demanded, stepping protectively closer to Marcus. Someone who's been cleaning up Marcus's mess for 3 years, the woman replied. My name is Catherine Blackwood, and I represent certain interests that were very inconvenienced by Detective Thompson's investigation. Marcus's jaw tightened. I destroyed everything. There's nothing left. Oh, Marcus, Catherine said with mock sympathy. You really think we'd leave that to chance? You think we'd trust the word of a man who lost everything and had nothing left to lose? She pulled out a tablet and swiped to a series of documents. Copies of everything, stored in 3 separate locations. Insurance, you might say. And now that you've surfaced from your little hiding place, gotten attached to new people who matter to you, what do you want? Victoria interrupted, her voice steady despite her fear. Smart question from a smart woman, Catherine said approvingly. I want Detective Thompson to finish what he started, not the investigation. That ship has sailed. I want him to eliminate the evidence permanently. All of it. I told you I already... Not destroyed, Marcus. Eliminated. As in the people who have copies need to stop existing. Catherine's smile turned predatory. 3 targets, clean jobs, no questions asked. The parking garage fell silent except for the distant hum of ventilation systems. Victoria felt sick as the implications sank in. You want me to kill for you? Marcus said flatly. I want you to clean up your own mess, Catherine corrected. You put these people in danger with your investigation. Now you can save them by doing what needs to be done. And if I refuse? Catherine swiped to another screen on her tablet. Video footage of Emma playing in the butterfly garden that morning, laughing as she chased a monarch between the flowers. Such a beautiful child, Catherine said softly. So special. Did you know there are people who pay extraordinary amounts for children with unique qualities? Emma's particular gifts would make her very valuable to the right buyers. Victoria lunged forward, but Marcus caught her arm. Don't, he said quietly. That's what she wants. Smart man, Catherine said. Now you have 24 hours to decide. Kill 3 people who helped you investigate my clients 3 years ago, or lose the little girl who finally taught you how to love again. Those people are innocent, Marcus protested. They were just doing their jobs. And now they're loose ends, Catherine replied with a shrug. Loose ends that your new family will pay for if you don't tie them up. She tucked the tablet back into her purse and checked her watch. 24 hours, Marcus. I'll be in touch with details. Catherine turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Victoria? I know what you're thinking. All that money, all that power, surely you can protect your daughter. But you'd be amazed how easily accidents happen to even the most protected children. Ask Marcus. He knows. With that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Victoria and Marcus alone in the suffocating silence of the parking garage. Victoria turned to Marcus, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the gentle janitor who had unlocked her daughter's voice, but the broken detective who had lost everything and was about to lose it all again. "We have to call the police," she said. "And tell them what? That a woman we can't prove was here made threats we can't prove she made?" Marcus shook his head. "Catherine Blackwood doesn't exist in any database. These people have had 3 years to perfect their invisibility. Then we run. I have resources, connections. We can disappear. For how long? And what kind of life would that be for Emma?" Marcus's voice was hollow with despair. "She just learned to speak. Victoria. She just learned to trust. How do we take that away from her?" Victoria felt tears burning her eyes as the impossible choice crystallized before them. Save 3 innocent people and lose Emma, or save Emma and become murderers. "There has to be another way," she whispered. Marcus looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, lost too much. "There's always another way," he said quietly. "The question is whether we're strong enough to find it." But even as he spoke the words, Victoria could see the doubt in his expression, and somewhere above them, Emma was probably wondering why storytime had been canceled, why the adults in her life suddenly looked so frightened. Time was running out, and the shadows in the parking garage seemed to be closing in. That night, Victoria sat in Emma's bedroom watching her daughter sleep, memorizing every detail of her peaceful face. How could she explain to a 6-year-old that their newfound happiness was built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath them? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Meet me at the office, I have an idea." Victoria kissed Emma's forehead and slipped out, leaving detailed instructions with her night security team. If anything happened to her, they were to take Emma immediately to Victoria's sister in California and never look back. She found Marcus in her office, surrounded by papers and multiple laptops. His eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion, but there was something different in his expression, a determination she hadn't seen before. "Tell me you found something," Victoria said. "I found everything," Marcus replied, turning one of the laptops toward her. "Catherine Blackwood might not exist officially, but money leaves trails. Always." The screen showed a complex web of financial transactions, shell companies, and interconnected accounts. "I spent the last 6 hours following every lead I could remember from my investigation. The people who killed my daughter, who destroyed my life, they're all connected to Meridian Holdings. I've heard of them," Victoria said slowly. "International investment firm. Very exclusive clientele. Very criminal clientele," Marcus corrected. "Drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers, anyone with dirty money to clean. And guess who sits on their board of directors?" Victoria studied the screen, then felt her blood turn to ice. "Richard Ashford. But that's my ex-husband, Emma's father." "The plot thickens," Marcus said grimly. "Victoria, this isn't about my old investigation anymore. This is about Emma." "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled up another file. "Richard Ashford disappeared 2 years ago, right around the time my family was killed. Financial records show massive transfers from his personal accounts to Meridian Holdings just before he vanished. He stole from them," Victoria breathed. $50 million. And then he disappeared, leaving behind a wife with a $12 billion empire and a daughter with very special gifts. Marcus met her eyes. "Emma isn't just leverage to control me, Victoria. She's collateral for her father's debt." Victoria sank into a chair as the full scope of their situation became clear. "They've been watching her all along, waiting for the right moment. And I gave them that moment by getting close to your family, by making Emma matter to someone who knows their secrets." Marcus's voice was thick with guilt. "This is all my fault." "No," Victoria said firmly. "This is Richard's fault, and these criminals' fault, but not yours." She stood up, decision crystallizing in her mind. "How much evidence do you actually have? Enough to connect Richard to Meridian, Meridian to Catherine, and Catherine to the people who killed Lily, but not enough to prove any specific crimes. What if we don't need to prove crimes?" Victoria asked. "What if we just need to apply the right pressure?" Marcus looked confused, but Victoria was already reaching for her phone. "Who are you calling?" "The FBI," Victoria said. "Not to report crimes we can't prove, but to report stolen money we can trace. $50 million in fraud across international borders. That gets federal attention very quickly. Victoria, that will take months to investigate." "No, it won't." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. Because I'm about to make the biggest donation in FBI history to their financial crimes unit, with the specific request that they prioritize cases involving missing persons and stolen funds. Money talks, Marcus, and I'm about to make it scream. As she waited for the call to connect, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of using her power for something that truly mattered. But across town, Catherine Blackwood was making calls of her own. The timeline had just accelerated, and Emma Ashford was about to become the most valuable and endangered little girl in New York City. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. Victoria's call connected, and she began speaking in the calm, authoritative voice that had built empires and destroyed competitors. "This is Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Industries. I need to speak with someone about a $50 million fraud case, and I need to speak with them tonight." Marcus watched her work, seeing for the first time the full force of what Victoria Ashford could accomplish when she stopped trying to balance being a mother with being a businesswoman and started using every tool at her disposal to protect her child. It was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. But even as Victoria spoke with federal agents and Marcus cross-referenced financial records, neither of them noticed the small figure standing in the doorway of the office, having slipped past sleeping security guards with the supernatural quiet that had defined her for 6 years. Emma had heard everything. Emma stood in the shadows of the doorway, processing information that would have overwhelmed most adults. Her father had stolen money. Bad people wanted to hurt her. Marcus used to be a policeman who lost his little girl. But Emma wasn't most children. 6 years of silence had taught her to observe, to understand, to see patterns that others missed. And right now she could see something the adults couldn't. They were all trying to save her, but they were missing the most important piece of the puzzle. She stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. "Emma!" Victoria spun around, dropping her phone. "Sweetheart, how did you get here?" "Elevators work at night too," Emma said matter-of-factly. "And security guards sleep when they think no one's watching." Marcus closed his laptop quickly, but Emma had already seen enough. "Emma, you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." "Everything's dangerous," Emma replied with wisdom that seemed impossible for a 6-year-old. "But I know something you don't know." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, her heart breaking at having to have this conversation. "Baby, we're trying to fix things so that—" "Daddy's not dead," Emma interrupted quietly. The room fell completely silent. Victoria felt the world tilt on its axis. "What did you say?" "Daddy's not dead," Emma repeated. "He calls sometimes at night when you're working late. He talks to me." Victoria's hands began to shake. "Emma, that's not possible. Your father disappeared 2 years ago." "He didn't disappear," Emma said patiently. "He hid. Like Marcus hid. Like we're gonna have to hide." Marcus leaned forward, his detective instincts overriding his shock. "Emma, when did your daddy last call you?" "Yesterday," Emma said. "He said bad people were coming and that I should be ready to be very quiet again if I needed to." Victoria felt like she was drowning. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma's expression was heartbreakingly mature. "Because Daddy said the bad people were listening, and because you cry when you talk about Daddy, and I don't like it when you cry." Victoria pulled Emma into her arms, her mind racing. If Richard was alive, if he'd been in contact with Emma, then everything they thought they knew was wrong. "Emma," Marcus said gently, "did your daddy tell you where he was? Or how to reach him?" Emma nodded and pulled a small device from her pajama pocket, a burner phone that looked like a toy but clearly wasn't. "He gave me this last month, said it was our secret phone for emergencies." Emma looked between the two adults. "This feels like an emergency." Victoria stared at the phone as if it might explode. He's been watching you, talking to you." "For how long?" "Since I was 4, Emma said simply. "Right after the loud night when Mama cried a lot and policemen came to the house. The night Richard had supposedly disappeared." Victoria remembered it clearly. The police, the questions, the assumption that he'd been killed or kidnapped. But he'd been alive all along, hiding, watching his daughter grow up from a distance. "Emma," Victoria said carefully, "do you want to call your daddy?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Will it help save Marcus? Will it make the bad lady go away?" "I don't know, sweetheart, but it might give us answers." Emma nodded and pressed a single button on the device. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Emma? Baby, it's late. Are you okay?" "Hi, Daddy," Emma said in her soft, clear voice. "Mama and Marcus are here. We know about the bad people now." There was a long pause, then Richard's voice again, strained and urgent. Put me on speaker, Emma. We need to talk. Victoria activated the speaker function with trembling hands. Hello, Richard. Victoria. Richard's voice carried 3 years of pain and regret. I'm sorry for all of this, for everything. Where are you? Victoria demanded. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find me. But that's about to change. Richard's voice was grim. Catherine found me 6 months ago. She's been using me to watch Emma, to report on her development, her abilities. What abilities? Marcus interjected. Emma isn't just unusually perceptive, Richard said. She has what some people call perfect recall. She remembers everything she sees, everything she hears, with absolute clarity. Every conversation, every face, every detail. Victoria looked down at her daughter with new understanding. The blocks, the patterns. You're not just playing, are you? Emma shook her head. I'm remembering. Everything. Including the things the bad people said when they thought I wasn't listening. Richard's voice cut through their amazement. Victoria. Emma has been recording evidence against Meridian Holdings without even knowing it. Every conversation she's overheard, every meeting she's witnessed, it's all stored in her memory with perfect clarity. Which is why Catherine wants her, Marcus said, pieces falling into place. Not just to control me or to settle my debt, Richard confirmed. They want to know what Emma knows, and then they want to make sure she never tells anyone. Victoria felt ice form in her veins. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, Richard said grimly. Victoria, you have maybe 6 hours before they make their move. Catherine's people are already positioning around the building. Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve. Mama, I know where Daddy is. Everyone turned to look at the 6-year-old who had just upended everything they thought they knew. He's in the building, Emma said simply. 3 floors down. He's been there for 2 weeks. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Richard had been hiding in Victoria's own building, watching over Emma from a distance, waiting for the moment when their daughter's gift would either save them all or destroy everything. That moment had arrived. 20 minutes later, they stood in the sub-basement of Victoria's building, in a maintenance room Emma had somehow known existed. Richard Ashford looked nothing like the polished businessman Victoria had married 8 years ago. His hair was longer, his face weathered by 3 years of running, but his eyes held the same intensity that had first attracted her. You look good, Victoria, he said quietly. Motherhood suits you. Don't, Victoria said sharply. Don't you dare pretend this is a social call. You abandoned us. You stole $50 million and disappeared, leaving Emma and me to deal with the consequences. I left to protect you, Richard said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Meridian Holdings doesn't just launder money, Victoria. They traffic children, specifically children with unusual gifts. When they realized what Emma could do, what exactly can she do? Marcus interrupted. Richard knelt down to Emma's level. Show them, sweetheart. Show them what you showed me. Emma looked uncertain for a moment, then walked to a wall covered in building blueprints. She studied them for exactly 30 seconds, then turned back to the adults. This building has 14 floors above ground, 4 below. Emergency exits on floors 2, 7, and 12. Security stations at the main entrance, parking garage, and service entrance. Guard rotation changes every 8 hours at 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and 10 p.m. She paused, then continued in the same calm tone. The bad lady brought 12 people with her. 4 are watching the main entrance, 3 in the parking garage, 2 on the 7th floor, 2 on the roof, and 1 in the apartment building across the street with a sniper rifle. The adults stared at her in stunned silence. How could you possibly know that? Victoria whispered. I watched from the windows while you were talking to the FBI, Emma said simply. I count everything, I remember everything, I see patterns other people miss. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. Emma, that's not normal. I know, Emma said without embarrassment. But it's useful. Richard stood up, his expression grim. Meridian Holdings has been tracking children like Emma for decades. Perfect memory, pattern recognition, analytical abilities that exceed most adults. They call them assets. The plan was to kidnap Emma, train her, and use her abilities for intelligence gathering and financial crimes. Over my dead body, Victoria repeated, but this time her voice carried the cold fury of a mother protecting her child. That was always an option, Richard said. But then Emma did something they didn't expect. She chose to speak. She chose to trust people, and that changed everything. How? Marcus asked. Because children with emotional bonds fight back, Richard explained. Children who feel loved and protected don't cooperate with their captors. Emma's connection to you, Victoria, and to Marcus, It makes her useless to them as an asset. Emma looked up at the adults with those impossibly blue eyes. So they want to make me not love anyone anymore? The simple question cut through all their careful explanations and strategic thinking. This was about a little girl who had finally learned to trust, finally learned to love, and there were people who wanted to destroy that to use her gifts. Not if we stop them first, Victoria said, her voice steel. How? Richard asked. Catherine has us surrounded. She has enough evidence to destroy all of us, and she has resources we can't match. Marcus looked at Emma, seeing not just a child with unusual abilities, but a little girl who had been forced to grow up too fast, to understand too much. Emma, when you watched the bad people, did you see any patterns, anything that might help us? Emma nodded seriously. They're not watching the steam tunnels, and they don't know about the old subway entrance in the 4th basement. How do you know about that? Victoria asked. I explore when you're in meetings, Emma said matter-of-factly. Buildings have secrets like people do. Richard looked at his daughter with something approaching awe. Emma, can you get us out of the building without the bad people seeing us? Yes, Emma said immediately. But not yet. Why not yet? Emma's expression was serious beyond her years. Because if we run, they'll just chase us forever. But if we're smart, we can make them go away for good. Victoria knelt down beside her daughter. What are you thinking, sweetheart? I'm thinking, Emma said carefully, that I remember everything the bad people said. Every name, every plan, every secret, Anne. And if the right people heard those secrets, the FBI, Marcus breathed. But they'd need proof, Richard said. Emma's testimony wouldn't be enough. Emma smiled for the first time since entering the maintenance room. Who says it would just be testimony? She pulled out a small device Victoria had never seen before, something that looked like a toy recorder but clearly wasn't. Daddy gave me this 6 months ago. I've been recording everything just like he taught me. Emma's smile widened. I have 6 hours of Catherine talking about murders and kidnapping and money laundering, and I know exactly who to give it to. The adults stared at this remarkable 6-year-old who had been playing a deeper game than any of them realized. Emma, Victoria said slowly, have you been planning this? I've been getting ready, Emma corrected. For when the bad people finally came, Daddy said they would, and I wanted to be ready to protect my family. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. This brave little girl had been carrying the weight of protecting them all, and none of them had even known. Okay, Victoria said, her voice steady with new resolve. Let's finish this, all of us together. But as they began to plan their next move, none of them noticed the tiny camera hidden in the maintenance room's ventilation system, or the woman watching them from a command center 3 blocks away. Catherine Blackwood had been listening to every word, and she was already adapting her strategy. The final game was about to begin. Dawn was breaking over Manhattan, as Victoria's building became the center of the most unusual standoff in FBI history. Special Agent Sarah Chen stood in the command center that had been hastily set up in the lobby, listening to 6 hours of recorded conversations that detailed enough federal crimes to put dozens of people away for life. This recording device, Agent Chen said, holding up Emma's tiny recorder. Where did a 6-year-old get military-grade surveillance equipment? Her father, Victoria said simply. He's been preparing for this day for 3 years. Emma sat in a chair beside Victoria, wearing headphones and talking quietly into a microphone. Every word she spoke was being compared to the recordings, and every detail was matching perfectly. Her memory was indeed flawless. Mama, Emma said, pulling off the headphones. The nice FBI lady wants to know about the money. Agent Chen leaned forward. Emma, you mentioned hearing conversations about bank accounts. Can you remember the numbers? Emma nodded and proceeded to recite 17 different account numbers, routing codes, and transfer amounts, all from memory. Agent Chen's eyes widened as she realized they were looking at the complete financial records of one of the largest criminal enterprises in North America. Mrs. Ashford, Agent Chen said quietly, your daughter just handed us enough evidence to dismantle an international crime syndicate. And Catherine Blackwood? Marcus asked. Is currently barricaded on the 7th floor with what's left of her team, Agent Chen replied. We've arrested 11 of her people, but she's holding out. She's waiting for something, Richard said from where he stood near the windows. Catherine doesn't give up, she adapts. As if summoned by his words, Victoria's phone rang. The caller ID showed simply, C. Put it on speaker, Agent Chen instructed. Victoria answered. Hello, Catherine. Congratulations, Victoria. Catherine's voice was calm, almost amused. You've played this very well. Better than I expected. It's over, Catherine. Surrender now and maybe the FBI will consider a plea deal. Catherine's laugh was like ice. Oh, my dear Victoria, you think this was about money? About crime syndicate? This was always about Emma. The room fell silent. What do you mean? Victoria asked, though she was afraid she already knew. I represent interests far beyond Meridian Holdings, Catherine said. There are governments, corporations, organizations that would pay billions for a child with Emma's abilities. The recordings, the evidence, the FBI raid, it's all just theater. You're surrounded, Agent Chen said sharply. There's nowhere to run. Who said anything about running? Catherine replied. I just needed everyone in one place. The lights in the building suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but it was too late. In that moment of confusion, the unthinkable happened. Emma was gone. Victoria screamed her daughter's name, but only silence answered. Somehow, in the space of a power outage that lasted less than 10 seconds, Catherine Blackwood had managed to take Emma from a room full of FBI agents. How is that possible? Agent Chen demanded, speaking rapidly into her radio. Marcus was already moving toward the stairs. Catherine's been planning this for months. She knows this building better than we do. They found the answer on the 7th floor, where Catherine's last stand turned out to be an elaborate misdirection. The room was empty except for a laptop playing looped audio to make it sound like people were still inside. But Emma's voice came through the building's intercom system, calm and clear. It's okay, Mama, I'm okay and I'm ready. Emma, Victoria called out to the empty air. Where are you? Roof, Emma's voice replied. Catherine thinks she's very smart, but she made a mistake. What mistake? Agent Chen asked, speaking toward the intercom. She thinks I'm helpless, Emma said, and there was something in her 6-year-old voice that sounded ancient and wise. She thinks being little means being weak. She doesn't understand that I've been watching her for 6 months. I know all her patterns, too. The building's elevator suddenly activated, rising smoothly to the roof level. Emma, Victoria said desperately, don't do anything dangerous. We're coming. I know you are, Emma replied. And Catherine knows too. That's why she's about to make her biggest mistake. They reached the roof to find Catherine Blackwood standing near the edge, holding Emma's hand. A helicopter circled overhead, preparing to land. Stay back, Catherine called out as they emerged from the elevator. One more step and I drop her. But Emma looked completely calm, even serene. She looked directly at her mother and spoke in a voice that carried across the rooftop wind. Mama, remember what Marcus taught us? Sometimes the most important things we have to say come from somewhere deeper than our voices. Victoria felt her heart stop as she understood what Emma was really saying. Emma had been recording everything. Again. You've been talking for the last 10 minutes, Catherine, Emma said conversationally, about the governments you work for, about the other children you've taken, about the senators you've bribed and the judges you own. And this little recorder Daddy gave me? It's been broadcasting everything to the FBI computers downstairs. Catherine's face went white as she realized she'd been outmaneuvered by a 6-year-old. You see, Emma continued in that same calm voice, I learned something important from my mama and Marcus. When you love people, you protect them, and when you protect them, you become stronger than the people who want to hurt them. Emma stepped away from Catherine with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved, who knew she was safe, who knew her family would always come for her. Catherine lunged forward, but Marcus was already moving. In one fluid motion that recalled his days as a detective, he tackled Catherine to the ground as FBI agents swarmed the rooftop. Victoria ran to Emma and swept her into her arms, tears streaming down her face. You brilliant, brave, terrifying little girl, she whispered. I told you I was ready, Emma said simply, hugging her mother tight. Richard joined them, and for a moment they stood together as a family while Catherine Blackwood was arrested and read her rights. The helicopter above them circled once more before flying away, its passengers realizing their plan had failed. Is it over? Victoria asked Agent Chen. With the evidence Emma gathered, we'll be unraveling this network for years, Agent Chen replied. But for you? Yes, it's over. Marcus knelt down beside Emma as the FBI led Catherine away. You saved us all, sunshine. We saved each other, Emma corrected. That's what families do. As the sun rose fully over Manhattan, casting golden light across the city that had tried to steal Emma's voice, her freedom, her very identity, the little girl who had been silent for 6 years looked out at the world with new eyes. She had found her voice not in words alone, but in the courage to use her gifts to protect the people she loved. And surrounded by her mother, her father, and the man who had first shown her that silence could be powerful, but that speaking truth was even stronger, Emma Ashford smiled. Some stories end with words. This one ended with understanding that family isn't just about blood or law or convenience. It's about choosing to see each other, to protect each other, and to find strength in the spaces between words where love lives. Emma had spent 6 years learning to listen. Now, finally, she was ready to be heard. And the world, for the first time in her young life, was ready to listen.